The letter was the beginning of everything. At first I thought it was a prank. Who leaves an unmarked envelope on someone's doorstep these days? But as I held it in my hands, turning it over, I felt a strange unease. The paper was rough and yellowed, as if pulled from an ancient tome, and the handwriting sprawled across it was tight and spidery, almost clawed into the page. All it said was, "Prove yourself at the Witch's Glen tonight." No name, no return address. Just those words, scratched out like some private taunt. I don't know why I didn't just toss it. Maybe it was the relentless quiet of that evening, or the subtle dare the note posed, sinking under my skin like a splinter. I'd always brushed off ghost stories and folk legends. The tales of the witch who haunted the glen were no different. According to local legend, the place was cursed, haunted by the vengeful spirit of a woman condemned as a witch centuries ago. They said she prowled the glen at night, looking for the unworthy to pull down into her shadowed world. But on that moonless night, as I paced my kitchen, something compelled me to go. I don't know if it was curiosity or pride, or maybe a morbid urge to prove I wasn't afraid. So I found myself on the path to Witch's Glen, the forest dense and twisting around me, shadows stretching like fingers over the ground. As I walked, every crunch of a leaf or snap of a twig sounded like gunfire in the heavy silence. The air grew colder, biting at my skin, and the deeper I went, the thicker the darkness became, pressing in until I could barely make out the path in front of me. Soon, I reached the glen, an eerie clearing framed by gnarled oaks that seemed to lean in close, as if they were peering down at me. Everything felt wrong. The air was dense, almost metallic, with a bitter tang that clung to my tongue and throat. Shadows pooled thickly around the roots of the trees, coiling and stretching, while the mist curled at my feet, slithering around my ankles like tendrils. My pulse hammered as I scanned the clearing, waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Then she appeared. At first I thought she was part of the mist, just a figment of shadows and moonlight. But her figure solidified, a thin woman wrapped in tattered black fabric that clung to her like a second skin. Her face was hidden beneath the hood of her cloak, but two eyes gleamed from the darkness within, eyes that looked more like coals than anything human. She was still, eerily so, her gaze locked on me as if she'd been waiting all along. I opened my mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to scream, but no sound escaped. The woman, no, the witch, raised a hand, extending a bony finger that pointed directly at my chest. Her voice was like the rustle of dead leaves as it slipped into my mind, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You have trespassed," she whispered, her words settling over me like cold, damp earth. "And now, you are bound." The chill from her words sank deep into my bones, and though I wanted to turn and run, I couldn't move. Her gaze held me fast, as though it had rooted me in place, drawing out every ounce of courage I had left. The mist thickened around me, coiling tighter, rising higher until it nearly touched my face. My heartbeat thundered, each pulse pounding louder in the quiet, the sound only broken by her whisper that lingered in the air like smoke. Then, she was gone. Her figure dissolved back into the mist, leaving me alone in that dark, silent glen. But the quiet wasn't just silence. It was emptiness, a hollow void that swallowed all sound. I stumbled backward, breaking free from whatever invisible chain had kept me frozen, and forced myself to breathe, tasting the sharp tang of the air that left my throat raw. With every step I took to leave that accursed glen, I felt an unnatural weight pressing on me, a heaviness that clung to my skin like dampness from a storm. The journey home was a blur. I moved through the forest like I was half asleep, each step too slow, too heavy, like wading through dark water. By the time I reached my front door, my body ached with a deep, unfamiliar exhaustion. It was only when I turned on the light in my kitchen, saw my reflection in the window, that I noticed it. The faint marks on my skin, thin, jagged lines, branching out like veins beneath my skin, barely visible but undeniably there. They were dark, almost bruised, and stretched across my hands and arms. I blinked, rubbed at my skin, hoping it was some trick of the light, but the lines remained. Panic clawed up my throat. Maybe I was just overtired, a trick of stress and shadows, anything to rationalize what I couldn't understand. But even as I tried to shake the feeling, I knew that something deeper, something darker, had changed. That night, sleep was a cruel taunt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, that hooded figure shrouded in mist, her eyes burning like embers from the darkness. I woke up gasping, drenched in cold sweat, as if she were there beside my bed, watching. And each time I woke, the marks on my skin seemed a little darker, a little more distinct. Whispers echoed in my mind, too faint to understand, but insistent, like words barely heard through a door. I could feel them wriggling into my thoughts, creeping into my dreams, filling me with dread I couldn't shake. As the days passed, things only got worse. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corners of my eyes, shadows twisting and dancing along the walls, slithering closer whenever I turned away. The bruised marks crept further up my arms, spreading across my body, no longer faint lines but dark, pulsing veins that throbbed with a strange warmth. My skin felt too tight, like it was shrinking, trapping me in some invisible cage. And the whispers grew louder, forming words now, fragments of a language I didn't understand but somehow feared. Panic gnawed at me, unraveling my sense of reason. I could no longer deny it. Whatever curse she'd placed on me, it was spreading, consuming me inch by inch. If I had any hope of breaking it, I would have to go back to the Witch's Glen. I would have to face her again. Returning to the Witch's Glen felt like a death march. Each step toward that dark forest weighed heavier than the last, the dread coiling around my spine like ice, urging me to turn back. But the curse gnawing beneath my skin pushed me forward, driving me into the depths of the woods with a compulsion I couldn't resist. I could feel it pulsing with every heartbeat, a sickly warmth creeping along my veins, tainting every part of me. The forest was even darker this time, as if the trees themselves had thickened their branches to lock out the light, sealing me in with the shadows. The night was as silent as death. There were no insects chirping, no rustling leaves, just a profound, unnatural quiet that settled in my ears like thick cotton. I moved slowly, my hands clutched around a few charms I'd brought with me. Salt, a small silver amulet, a crude iron dagger, tokens of protection that suddenly felt foolishly inadequate. As I neared the heart of the glen, a prickling sensation crawled over my skin, a heat that pulsed beneath my flesh. I stopped in my tracks, every sense on high alert, feeling as if I'd crossed an invisible line into her territory. The mist thickened around me, rising from the earth in coiling tendrils, wrapping around my ankles and wrists, as though it recognized me. I gritted my teeth, swallowing back the bile rising in my throat. I was close now. I could feel her presence pressing down on me, an unseen force tightening around my lungs, making it hard to breathe. Then, there she was again. She appeared from the mist, as though she'd been woven from it, her figure as dark and fluid as a shadow. This time, her hood was lowered, revealing a face that was beautiful yet terrible, with hollowed cheekbones and eyes that glowed with a fiery malice. She didn't look like she belonged to this world. Her gaze pinned me in place, those ember-like eyes narrowing as a twisted smile curled across her lips. "You have returned," she murmured, her voice slithering around me, each word leaving a trail of ice in its wake. "Desperation, or something darker?" I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper, barely audible against the weight of her presence. What do you want from me?" She tilted her head, a cruel glint flickering in her eyes. "What you now possess is mine. My gift. My mark. It is yours only as long as I will it." I trembled, feeling the burning ache spreading under my skin, the cursed veins darkening as though reacting to her words. "Please," I choked out, "take it back. I'll do whatever you ask." Her laughter was soft but cruel, winding through the trees like poison. "Oh, but there is a way. A sacrifice willingly given, one that you hold close. Something of worth to you must be surrendered." She extended her hand, her bony fingers tipped with sharp, claw-like nails. "Blood for blood, bond for bond. Only then will I release you." In that moment I understood. She wanted a piece of me, something precious, something that tied me to this life. My mind raced, and instinctively, my hand moved to my pocket, touching the cold metal of the watch I'd carried with me for years. It was my father's watch, the only thing I had left of him. My fingers trembled as I held it, realizing the weight of what I was about to do. But as I looked back at her, at those eyes burning with hunger and malice, I knew I had no choice. The curse was in me, devouring me from within, and it would only end if I paid her price. With a trembling hand, I pulled the watch from my pocket, its cold, familiar weight grounding me even as my heart raced. My father's watch. Its surface was worn smooth, its face cracked in places from years of use, but it had always worked, ticking softly like a heartbeat. He'd carried it through everything, late shifts, long nights, the worst storms of his life. And now it was here with me, its ticking mingling with the cursed pulse beneath my skin, the curse that bound me to her. The witch's eyes flickered, her gaze fixed on the watch in my hand. Her lips curved into a slow, predatory smile. "Yes, a sacrifice of worth," she hissed, her voice rolling through the glen like a gust of cold wind. "Blood, memory, and a piece of the soul." A part of me wanted to scream, to throw the watch into the trees and run, but another part of me, worn down by the curse's relentless grip, by the shadows that stalked me in every waking moment, knew I had no other choice. I clenched the watch tightly, the metal digging into my palm until it hurt, and took a deep breath. I raised the dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight, and made a shallow cut across my palm. Blood welled up, dark and warm, and I let it drip over the watch, each drop landing with a soft patter that echoed in the heavy silence. The witch's gaze intensified, and she leaned forward, watching the blood spread across the cracked glass face, seeping into every groove. The mist around me thickened, curling closer, pressing in like hundreds of grasping hands. I felt it, something dark and ancient stirring in the air, a force that felt both eager and cruel. As the last drop of blood fell, the watch's ticking stopped. The air pulsed, and a rush of icy wind swept through the glen, rattling the branches overhead and carrying with it a low, keening wail. I staggered back, clutching my bleeding hand, feeling as though something vital had just been torn from me. The witch's form shimmered, her body dissolving like smoke, but her eyes remained fixed on mine, blazing with a cold, hateful satisfaction. "The bond is broken," she murmured, her voice now a faint echo in the gathering mist. "But remember this, mortal. You are forever marked." Her laughter, cruel and hollow, faded as her figure melted into the shadows, leaving nothing but silence and the pale mist swirling at my feet. For a long moment I just stood there, numb and empty, clutching the now silent watch in my hand. The glen seemed darker, emptier, as though it had swallowed the last traces of her presence. Slowly I turned and stumbled back along the forest path, feeling strangely lighter but deeply unsettled, as if something still lingered, clinging to the edges of my mind. The forest released me, the oppressive weight lifting as I reached the edge of the trees. Yet as I stepped into the faint dawnlight, a strange, hollow feeling settled in my chest. The curse was gone. At least the dark marks on my skin had faded, leaving only faint scars. But even as I walked home, an unshakable chill remained. The witch was gone, but the words she had left behind whispered through my thoughts, leaving me with a terrible certainty that even though I had paid her price, the shadows would never truly let me go. The days after my encounter with the witch passed in a haze, as if I were sleepwalking through my own life. Though the marks on my skin had faded to faint scars, a heaviness lingered, something I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. It was subtle at first, an occasional whisper, a shadow flitting in the corner of my vision. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, a remnant of fear still lurking in my thoughts. But the whispers didn't fade. If anything, they grew louder, more insistent, slipping into the quiet moments when I was alone. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear her voice, a faint echo curling through my mind, taunting me with words I couldn't quite understand. When I tried to sleep, I'd see her face behind my eyelids, those burning eyes staring into me, reminding me that I was still marked. One evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen, a sudden chill swept through the room. It was strange, this unnatural cold, seeping in from nowhere. I checked the windows, thinking one must have been left open, but they were all locked tight. Yet the chill persisted, sinking deeper, numbing my fingers as I clutched the edge of the table, trying to keep myself grounded. Then, I heard it, a faint ticking. It was unmistakable, that steady rhythm I hadn't heard since I'd left the witch's glen. My father's watch. I'd placed it in a drawer after that night, hoping that locking it away might also lock away the memories. But now the ticking filled the silence, louder with each beat, echoing in the empty kitchen like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. The hairs on my neck prickled as I stood, my movements slow, almost reluctant. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But some dark part of me, the part that had driven me to the glen in the first place, pushed me to the drawer. My hand shook as I pulled it open, my pulse racing, every instinct screaming at me to turn away. There it was, resting atop a pile of old receipts and loose change. The watch was ticking, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness of the room. But it wasn't just the sound that sent chills through me. No, the watch itself had changed. The cracks in its glass face had darkened, spreading like veins across its surface, almost like the marks that had once covered my skin. And beneath the glass, where the number should have been, I saw something else. Tiny shapes, symbols etched in a dark, pulsing red, shifting ever so slightly as if alive. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the air thickening around me with that same metallic taste I'd felt in the glen. The whispers returned, louder now, filling my mind with half-formed words, promises and threats that I couldn't quite grasp. And through it all, the witch's face flashed before me, her smile widening, her eyes glinting with a dark satisfaction. The realization sank in, heavy and cold. I had made my sacrifice. I had given her what she'd asked, but it was not enough. The bond she'd spoken of hadn't truly broken. She was still with me, lurking in the shadows, a presence tied to my soul, lingering like a dark stain. And with each tick of the watch, I knew this was far from over. I had paid her price, but the debt had only just begun.